because of the IT industry, the information technology industry. And a lot of it was based on outsourcing that was happening from the US to India. 4-to-1 disparity in the wages for engineers. So if I've got to pay $150,000 to an engineer in Silicon Valley, I could pay $30,000 to $40,000 to someone in India. And that's how the IT outsourcing started. If you look at manufacturing, a lot of manufacturing is done in China today, right? Has been for a long period of time. A lot of stuff gets made in China. Reason? Wage disparity. You know, you hire a manufacturing engineer in the US, it can cost you $80,000. You can hire a manufacturing engineer in Shanghai or Pudong and a whole host of other places. You can pay them $20,000. You get a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 disparity in wages, which therefore makes it easier to make products at a cheaper value in China. And when you can make products cheaper, then there are some advantages in the US, and that is you can make those products available to a very large audience of people so that everyone can have a laptop, and everyone can have an iPod, and everyone can have an iPad. I had a very interesting discussion on this some time ago, saying, well, what if we did all our manufacturing in the US? We did all the manufacturing in the US, let me tell you what would happen. What would happen is we could still make the iPad, but only a select few would be able to afford an iPad because we would have to sell it for $5,000 instead of $500 or $1,000. So what would happen is the very elite would be able to buy an iPad, and most of the students wouldn't have it, and most of the middle class wouldn't have it, and you'd have this situation where the elite of the elite are able to afford an iPad and the rest can't. But today what happens is, because of the fact that we make those products in China, we're able to increase the standard of living of the average American, an average student, and so on and so forth. So, you know, as much as people sometimes berate the transfer of jobs, the fact of the matter is the country does benefit at the end of the day. Yes, there are certain people that don't have jobs, and that's the big balance that we've got to sort of worry about, saying, what do we do? All right, now, why am I bringing all this up? Well, here's the challenge. If this wage disparity that has been a big boon for India and China, if that wage disparity gets eroded away over a 10-year period because you have to give 15% raises to employees in China and India versus 2% or 3% in the US, it doesn't take very long when you run the math on those, that in about 15 to 20 years, you get to a point where salaries in China and India start to approach the salaries in the US. And then when you look at transportation costs of shipping as the price of oil keeps going up, the transportation costs of shipping something from China to the US, when you add that on to your manufactured goods, you get to a point where you can't make that anymore in China or India. Now that's good news for the US. In fact, there was a recent McKinsey report that came out, McKinsey Consulting, that said that manufacturing jobs are coming back. Manufacturing jobs are coming back to the US. And our view is that in the next 15 years or so, a lot of the engineering jobs are coming back to the US. Now, we have a problem. We got to make sure that we have indigenous talent that gets created, because if we don't have the talent, we got a bigger problem. Because we can't get that talent, because that talent now can live very comfortably in China and India. There are people that don't want to go to the US anymore because they have a standard of living that's just as good or better in China and India, because the salaries keep going up and they're getting wealthier and wealthier, and the stock market's booming and lots of jobs are getting created. And when you look at the needs of the family and parents and so on, those kids want to stay home. So there are some very, very interesting phenomena at work, forces at work, that are going to really change, you know, the sort of the composition of higher ed, especially from a technology perspective. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, every kind of higher ed, but I'm talking about technology-oriented higher ed. So I think one of the things that you folks at ISI need to worry about is to think about globalization and having presence outside the US. And I know that you folks are working at that, hence one of the reasons why I think you're here, because you will see some very, very interesting developments with respect to the recruitment of students, where they come, where they don't come, where they go. Let me explain. As I was talking to this professor at Northwestern 10 days ago, one of the things he mentioned to me, which I don't have the numbers to back up because I don't know, but this is what he said to me. He says, Pramod, there's another thing that's happening in the student enrollment at Northwestern in the engineering computer science department. I said, what? He says, we have very few students from India anymore. He says, most of our students now are from China. So I looked at him and I said, why? He says, Pramod, because when it comes to engineering jobs, computer science jobs, he says, India's booming and there's local jobs there now. And so a lot of these students don't want to come here anymore. Now, he says, China today excels in manufacturing, not in electrical engineering and computer science. So he says a lot of our students today at Northwestern are coming from China. But as China develops further, which it is certainly, because as internal demand grows in China, and as they start making their own products, own software, not just manufacturing, but computer science oriented software and so on, and that'll happen, it's just a matter of time. He says, so we're seeing a big change in the mix-up, or the composition rather, of where these students are coming from. And so now I don't have data to back up that statement, but I'm just taking the word of a chairman of the department who's telling me where most of the students are coming from in the electrical engineering and computer science department. So some very, very interesting and profound changes that are taking place. But we sort of look at it from our perspective as investors as good news, because when you think about it, the standard of living is going up everywhere. Good things are happening. People are living lives that have a higher standard of living, and the lower middle class is slowly also moving up, albeit not as fast as we would like to. And the good news in all this is that some of these jobs, we believe, assuming we can create the talent locally in the US, some of these jobs are coming back to the US, whether they be manufacturing jobs or whether they be engineering jobs, software jobs, and so on. And so that's good news. And with respect to manufacturing, and I have 5 minutes left here, so let me just quickly close here. The good news and some ramifications in the US as well, and I think it'll depend on your staffing as well, Doug, something you should think about. Some of the stuff that we're seeing is as follows. As people start thinking about bringing manufacturing back to the US, and I've had conversations with industrialists, including our own selves, where we say, okay, so if we were to invest in a manufacturing facility, where would we put that manufacturing facility? Because one of the challenges with manufacturing is it's fixed assets, it's buildings, it's machines, you're stuck once you do it. Well, one thing is very clear: we need to be in a place where there are no unions. Well, let me tell you what the ramifications of that are. My belief is 50 years from now, North will shutter. The northern cities of the US will be shuttered down. The action's going to be in the South. So the Detroits, the Michigans, the Chicagos, the Ohios, those areas can't attract investments in manufacturing because they're union towns. Don't want to be in union towns, right? And so the money, the natural way in which money will flow will be to the South, the Texas, the Floridas, especially Texas, the Louisianas, the Georgias, Bible Belt does have some advantages of having some biblical values. So I believe that, and that translates into labor laws and so on and so forth. So I believe that you will see the southern part of the U.S. flourish over the next 50 years, and the northern part of the U.S., obviously liberal, socialist, I think will suffer because the natural flow of money and therefore jobs will go down south. So go west is going to be replaced with go south, young man, go south. But in all this though, and I get asked a lot, and in fact I was speaking at I got an award recently at the Silicon Valley Forum, actually 2 weeks ago, and I gave a speech there. And I made some observations and comments, and that is a lot of people ask us, or ask me and, my colleagues in the venture industry, well, what does it take for the Silicon Valley concept and mindset to be transplanted in different parts of the world, whether it's in Dubai or whether it's in China, whether it's in India or even Europe. Right? And I made an observation, and I think it's a unique observation, and I said one of the reasons why Silicon Valley flourishes, certainly the availability of money, but money's not the only thing. Money is a factor, but money will chase opportunities wherever they are, which is why we're in China and anywhere else. But when it comes to innovation, if you look at the dot-com bust that took place 10 years ago and everyone said, oh, it's over. Well, look, where did the next set of innovation take place with the Facebook and Twitter and Zynga? It's all in Silicon Valley, right? If anything, it migrated even more to Silicon Valley than East Coast and South Coast or Southwest and so on. And so one of the reasons why Silicon Valley flourishes is not just the money, but, and let me just make the statement, and there I think there's a scriptural element to it in some ways, albeit not really. And that is that one of the things we do in Silicon Valley is we give people, including ourselves, but also the people that we back, the freedom to fail. When you innovate, you're not always going to be successful, because sometimes your plans will work out and sometimes they won't. And so when you give people the freedom to fail without stigmatizing them with, oh, you're a failure. And so I made this statement, and there were quotes in Silicon Valley journals about this. I said, failure is not a person. Failure is an event in a person's life. Failure is not a person. Failure is an event in a person's life, and the big issue is, what did that person learn from the mistakes they made? And they actually become more valuable downstream. So when we look, let me explain what I mean by that. When we look for executives to run our companies that we funded, as we expand the management teams of these companies, and as we bring in bona fide CEOs, and VPs of marketing, and VPs of product management, and VPs of engineering, as the companies grow, the founders, max out, so we have to bring in new people. One of the things we look at is to see, all right, who are we hiring? And as we look at their backgrounds, we say, okay, so have you dealt with adversity in your life? Have you dealt with adverse situations in the companies you funded, or the companies you run or you worked at? Because startups have a very difficult time to grow because they're competing with larger companies, and they're dealing with customers who are always suspect about buying from smaller companies. They'd rather buy from IBM. The famous adage, no one ever got fired for buying from IBM. Why would anyone buy from a startup? A VP of CIO of a department of a company might get fired saying, you bought this from this $10 million company when you could have bought this from an IBM? That's a multi-billion-dollar company. Well, so startups go through a very difficult time. They have to learn how to manage adversity. And so when we look for executives, we always look at it and say, okay, so what kinds of problems have you had in the past? And what kinds of failures have you had in the past? And what kinds of mistakes you made, and what have you learned from those mistakes? so a very interesting quip that I use is always want to hire people that have made mistakes, but people that have made mistakes with someone else's nickel, not mine. But that all says about, you know, innovation, right? And I think that's true of human beings as well. You know, God, as He looks at us and He works with us as human beings, you know, I think it goes back to, that's the way God deals with us, right? He looks at it and He says, failure is not a person. It's an event in a person's life. The big thing is, what has that person learned from it? So, it's very redemptive in that sense, that God is a God who looks at us and He lets us make mistakes, and He doesn't hold that against us. So anyway, there's lots of changes taking place in the global market. I might be all wrong, but there are some pretty interesting, profound implications going forward for the U.S. and for countries like China and India. And I certainly, you know, the flow of talent, what's important in all this is talent